All right, let's dive into the UK benefit system, specifically universal credit. Looks like we've got a great mix of sources for this one. Some official government websites and some really useful information from Citizens Advice. I'm kind of getting this sense that you want like a complete picture of how this whole thing works, right?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
Like maybe you're thinking about some big life changes, need to figure out what your options are, or maybe you're just curious about this safety net that's out there.
It never hurts to be prepared.
Exactly. And trust me, there are some surprising things you might not expect. Like, did you know you might actually need a partner to even apply for this benefit?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
And what happens if, like, the website crashes when you're in the middle of trying to submit everything? Don't worry, we'll get into all of that.
Let's start with the basics, though. Universal credit. It's basically a payment to help with your living costs, if you're on a low income or out of work in the UK.
Okay, that makes sense. And it's meant to, like, simplify things,
Right.
right? By combining a bunch of older benefits into this one system.
Exactly. The idea was to streamline everything, make it more efficient and easier to navigate.
So, good in theory, but how does that actually work when you're trying to apply?
Well, the official place to apply is the gov.uk website.
Okay, all online.
Yep. Which has its pros and cons. We'll get into that later.
We'll definitely dive into the whole online thing, yeah. But first, walk me through the steps. Like, what do you actually DO to apply?
So you start by creating an account on gov.uk, pretty standard, and then you fill out the application form, which asks for, well, a lot of details, your income, your housing situation, all sorts of stuff.
Our sources mentioned a 28-day deadline to complete the application after you start it.
Right, so that's something to be aware of.
It's kind of stressful.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to start the application and then just let it linger, because if you miss that deadline, you got to start all over again.
Oh, that's no good. So, better to be prepared and have everything ready to go before you even begin.
Absolutely. And one really important thing to know about being prepared, if you're part of a couple, you have to apply jointly for universal credit.
No flying solo on this one.
Nope, it's all about assessing the household income and needs together. You're considered like a single financial unit.
Interesting. Okay, that makes sense. So before I even click apply, what are some things I should be thinking about?
Both the gov.uk site and Citizens Advice really stress the importance of using benefit calculators.
Why are those so important?
Well, they can give you a realistic idea of whether you're even eligible for universal credit and roughly how much you might receive. It helps you avoid a situation where you could end up worse off financially.
Worse off. How could that happen?
Well, think about it. If you're already receiving other benefits, those might stop as soon as you apply for universal credit,
Oh,
even if your application ends up being rejected.
wow. That's a risk I wouldn't want to take. Definitely better to be informed and know what you're getting into.
Exactly. And that's where getting advice from Citizens Advice can be really helpful.
Okay, so let's say I've done my homework, used the calculators, maybe even talked to Citizens Advice. I'm ready to dive into that application. What kind of information do they need from me?
All right, get ready for a bit of a list. You'll need your bank details, national insurance number.
Okay, so the essentials.
Yep. Proof of identity, too, like your driver's license or passport.
Makes sense.
They'll need info about your housing situation, like how much rent you pay, any earnings from work, details about other benefits you might be receiving.
Sounds like a lot of paperwork.
Well, the good news is it's all online. But the point is, you need to have this information ready.
Should I be digging out old bank statements and pay slips just in case?
It's not a bad idea to gather anything that might be relevant. They'll also ask about any disabilities or health conditions that could affect your ability to work. And any childcare costs you have.
Oh, right, childcare.
Uh-huh. And any savings and investments.
Got to see the whole picture.
Exactly.
And what if I'm missing something when I start the application?
You might have to schedule an appointment either over the phone or in person at a job center.
So there's still a human element to this whole thing.
Yeah, definitely. And here's where it gets interesting. They also ask you to create what's called a claimant commitment.
Okay, a claimant commitment. What's that?
It's basically a document that outlines what you will be doing to find work or increase your earnings while you're receiving universal credit.
So it's not just about getting financial help. It's about actively participating in improving your situation.
Exactly. Taking ownership, showing that you're committed to becoming more self-sufficient.
And this claimant commitment ties directly into that.
It does. It's a way of ensuring that universal credit isn't just a handout. It's a system that encourages and supports people to, move towards independence.
I see. So it's not just a temporary fix.
Right. It's about a more sustainable future.
And I'm guessing organizations like Citizens Advice play a big role in helping people navigate all of this.
Huge role. They're a vital resource for anyone who needs guidance, support, or even just a bit of reassurance.
We'll definitely dive deeper into their role in the next part. But for now, let's talk about something that could go wrong. What if, like in the middle of applying online, the gov.uk website crashes?
Good question. And thankfully, the website does address those kind of what-if scenarios.
Because I can imagine that happening, especially if a lot of people are trying to access the site at the same time.
Yeah, it's possible. So if something like that happens, or there's another reason why you're delayed in applying, there's an option to backdate your claim.
Backdate, what does that mean?
It means you could potentially receive benefits for the period before you actually submitted your application.
Oh.
But there are rules about when you can backdate.
Right, so it's not just automatic.
Nope. You might be eligible if you have a disability, or if health issues prevented you from applying earlier, or even if there were technical issues with the website itself that were out of your control.
Okay, so provisions for legitimate delays, but you need to provide evidence to support your request for backdating.
Right. They want to make sure the system is being used fairly.
Now, what happens if you disagree with the decision that's been made about your universal credit claim? Like, what if you think they got something wrong?
There's a process called mandatory reconsideration. It lets you challenge the decision.
So it's not just like, computer says no, and that's it.
No, not at all. There are checks and balances built into the system.
Okay, that's good to know. So we talked about preparing to apply, the actual application itself, and even what to do if things go wrong. What's next on our deep dive?
Well, let's get into some of the finer details, things like deductions, taper rates, and the whole digital side of universal credit.
All right, buckle up, everyone. We're about to get into the nitty-gritty, how universal credit really works in practice. Okay, so we're back, and we're ready to really dig into some of those finer details of universal credit. Before the break, we walked through like the basic steps of applying and some of the things to watch out for. But life isn't always so straightforward, right?
Definitely not.
It's not always a simple case of no job, need benefits. Like, what if you have a part-time job while you're applying, or you're getting some other kind of benefit already?
Yeah, like child benefit, for example.
Exactly. So how does all of that factor into, like, the universal credit calculation?
Well, that's where the concept of deductions comes in.
Deductions, does that just mean they, like, take money away from your universal credit payment?
Yeah, kind of. Certain types of income or benefits can reduce the amount of universal credit you get.
Makes sense.
It's all about making sure the system is fair, and that people aren't getting more support than they actually need.
So it's not a simple, like, pound-for-pound deduction.
No, it's more complicated than that. The amount they deduct depends on a bunch of things, like the type of income or benefit you have, your household situation, what's called the taper rate.
Taper rate. Okay, break that one down for me.
Think of it like a sliding scale. The taper rate determines how much your universal credit payment is reduced as your earnings go up.
So the more I earn, the less universal credit I receive.
Right, exactly.
It's not an all-or-nothing thing.
Nope, it's gradual. And it's designed to, encourage people to work. Because the goal is to make sure that taking on more hours or a higher paying job always results in you being better off financially, even if your universal credit goes down a bit.
Gotcha. So it's not punishing you for earning more.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance between providing support and encouraging people to become self-sufficient.
Okay, I like that. So where can people go to, like, learn more about these deductions and see how they might be affected personally?
The gov.uk website has a whole section on deductions. They give examples and explain how they calculate that taper rate. And of course, you can always talk to Citizens Advice for more personalized guidance.
Perfect. Resources are out there. Now, we talked a bit about how much of this whole process is online, but I want to explore that a bit more. Like, what are the pros and cons of having the universal credit application be entirely online?
It's definitely a big change from how things used to be.
Huge change.
Well, on the plus side, it's super convenient. You can apply from home, anytime, no need to travel anywhere or wait in line.
Yeah, I can see that being a big plus.
And it's more efficient for the government, too, Less paperwork, faster processing times.
Makes sense. But what about people who don't have access to technology or aren't comfortable using it? What happens to them?
That's a really important point. And it's one of the potential downsides of this whole digital-first approach.
Yeah, even navigating the gov.uk website can be pretty overwhelming, honestly.
It can be a lot to take in. And this is another area where citizens' advice can be a huge help. They can help bridge that digital divide by providing support and guidance in person, even help people access computers and the internet if they need to.
So they're kind of like a backstop, making sure everyone can access the system.
Exactly. It highlights how important it is to have both digital and human support in place.
Absolutely. Our sources also mentioned something called sanctions. What are those?
So sanctions are basically penalties that can be imposed if you don't meet certain requirements while you're receiving universal credit.
Oh, so like consequences if you're not holding up your end of the bargain.
We could say that. Things like missing job center appointments, not actively searching for work, or refusing a job offer without a good reason could trigger a sanction.
Okay, so you have to be actively trying to improve your situation.
Right. The system wants to see effort.
But I imagine getting sanctioned could be really tough financially, especially for someone who's already struggling.
Oh, absolutely. It can lead to a reduction or even a complete suspension of your payments.
Yikes, that's serious. Are there, like, any safeguards in place to make sure these sanctions are applied fairly?
Yes, definitely. You have the right to appeal a sanction if you think it was applied unfairly, or if there were special circumstances that weren't considered.
So there's a process for that.
There is. It's not just a blanket punishment.
Okay, good, because that would be tough. And I'm guessing, once again, citizens' advice could help someone navigate that appeals process.
Absolutely. They can provide support and guidance every step of the way.
So we've covered deductions, the online system, these potential sanctions. What other key aspects of universal credit should we be talking about?
I think it's important to remember that universal credit is meant to be a holistic support system. It's not just about giving people money, it's about helping them overcome barriers to work and achieve long-term financial stability.
So it's about more than just that monthly payment.
Exactly. Think things like access to training and education, help with childcare costs, support for people with disabilities or health conditions.
A multifaceted approach.
Exactly, because these issues are complex. And understanding all the nuances of universal credit, the challenges, the support systems, is so important for anyone who might be eligible.
We've done a lot of unpacking today, that's for sure. We've explored why universal credit exists, the steps to apply, the potential pitfalls, and the resources available. What's next on our journey?
I think it's time to zoom out a bit. Look at the bigger picture of what universal credit tells us about the UK's overall approach to supporting its citizens.
Ooh, I like that.
And think about the values that underpin this whole system.
Getting philosophical. I like it. Okay, so we're back and ready to tackle the bigger picture of universal credit. We spent a good chunk of time getting into the nitty-gritty, the how-tos, and the what-ifs. But now I want to zoom out a bit,
Yeah, let's get a wider view.
Think about what this whole system says about how the UK supports its citizens, the underlying values at play.
It's easy to get lost in the weeds, but it's important to consider the big picture.
Absolutely. So when you look at universal credit, what are some of those core values that jump out at you?
Well, one of the big ones is this idea of simplification. The system was supposed to become more streamlined, right?
Like a one-stop shop.
Exactly. Instead of having all these different benefits, you just have this one universal credit.
But has it really achieved that? I mean, we've been talking about all these nuances and complexities. It doesn't seem all that simple in practice.
You're not wrong. I mean, people's lives are complicated. Benefit systems need to be flexible to accommodate that.
And we've seen that with things like the taper rate, deductions, sanctions. It's not one size fits all.
Yeah, so the simplification goal was admirable, but the reality is, actually making it work that way has been a lot trickier.
For sure. And that kind of brings us to another big value: fairness. Is universal credit actually fair to everyone it's supposed to help?
That's a tough one. On the one hand, you could argue it creates a level playing field because it treats everyone the same based on their income and circumstances.
Okay, I see that.
But then you have things like those website crashes we talked about. The need for digital literacy, the risk of sanctions, those could disproportionately affect certain groups, right?
Like people who aren't tech savvy, those with disabilities, families facing multiple barriers to work.
Exactly. So this question of fairness, it's an ongoing discussion, something policymakers need to constantly be evaluating and adjusting to.
And that takes us right back to the importance of organizations like Citizens Advice. They really step in to help level the playing field by providing that personalized support and making sure people don't fall through the cracks.
Absolutely. They're that bridge between the individual and the system, helping
Yeah.
people navigate the complexities and get their specific needs met.
So it's a shared responsibility then. The government sets the framework, but it takes communities and organizations to make sure it actually works on the ground.
Right, and it speaks to this broader idea of social solidarity, the sense that we have a collective responsibility to support one another, especially those who are struggling.
Universal credit, at least in theory, is a way of putting that into action, guaranteeing a basic level of income and support regardless of your circumstances.
And acknowledging that poverty isn't always a personal failing, it's often the result of systemic issues and barriers.
But it's also about empowerment, right?
Yeah.
Helping people move beyond reliance on benefits, find work, build a more stable future.
Exactly. It's that delicate balance between providing a safety net and creating opportunity.
That's the tightrope. Universal credit is always walking.
And it's constantly being debated and tweaked and adjusted.
Which is what makes this whole discussion so fascinating. We're not just talking about the nuts and bolts. We're really grappling with these fundamental questions about fairness, responsibility, the role of government.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one big takeaway you want our listeners to ponder?
How about this? In a world that's increasingly reliant on digital systems, how do we make sure those systems are truly inclusive, that they don't leave anyone behind? Does an organization like Citizens Advice become even more important in bridging that digital divide?
It's something to think about for sure.
It is.
It's a reminder that even the best-intentioned systems need constant attention, adaptation, and a healthy dose of compassion.
Couldn't agree more.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into universal credit.
We've explored the ins and outs, the practicalities, the challenges, the bigger picture.
Hopefully you're feeling a little more informed and maybe even empowered to navigate this complex system.
And remember, there's help available every step of the way.
Whether you're thinking about applying yourself or just wanted a closer look, you're not alone.
Thanks for joining us.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.